right? Test, 1, 2, 3. Is this on? Yeah, it's on. All right. How was lunch? Usually after lunch, everyone is like, ooh, poof, and you're like, oh my God. Now he's going to talk about Redux, and it's going to be boring, and we're going to fall asleep. I suppose you're all wondering why I've gathered you here. I didn't. They did, but still. Before we start with the talk, I always have this segment. I just made it a bit shorter. Who was here last year, AgentConf? Okay, you can leave for 3 minutes, come back after I finish this, because you've already seen it. So I have a couple of questions for you. That's why I gathered you here, right? Are you coding on the edge of a rooftop at midnight? You're not a ninja developer, okay? Second one. Do you have wrinkles and does your back hurt when you walk to the fridge? All right, there are a couple of old guys, all right? No, my point is you're not a senior developer, all right? Do you have a large sombrero, yell, ole, ole, and eat tacos while coding? Yay, there we go. You're not a senior developer. And are you holding an instrument in your right hand while screaming at the top of your lungs and coding with your left hand? Come on, everyone, right? You're not a rockstar developer. So you might be wondering, I put you in a little existential crisis. You're like, what am I if I'm not all of these things? It said in that ad that we're rock stars. So we are just developers. Why do I put this segment before every one of my talks? Is because people in the audience usually think that people who are standing here, we're something special. We're like ninjas and so on. It's nothing special. It's not hard to prepare a talk. You just have to be passionate about a topic. Just submit for next year's call for papers, and you can do the same thing. Because at the end of the day, we're all code monkeys trying to make weird libraries work together by writing shitty hacks. That's my intro. So that being said, hello, ich bin Kitze, I'm a senior rockstar. No, I'm kidding. If you ask, Kitze, are you German? Your name sounds a little bit German. It's not, because I literally had to translate. This is a screenshot from this morning. Didn't know how to say ich bin in German. So I'm Macedonian. Kitze is just a nickname. And I'm a bit, if you follow me on Twitter, if you're not, you should. That's my nickname. If you are, you know that I'm a bit tired of web development. So in the past couple of months, I'm just ranting. I hate this, I hate that. I'm a bit boring, I know. But I've really had it. You know, I don't know for how many years do you have to work in web development to say, okay, fuck it, I've had it with this. I'm going somewhere in a village, I'm going to have a farm, like 3 pigs, and that's it. I cannot stand it anymore. So I'm so tired of web dev that I started a YouTube channel. Now I'm trying to do things for YouTube and slowly just move away from web development. So the channel is /Kitze. So why am I tired of web dev? What are the main reasons that I'm tired? We just cannot agree on anything. Have you listened to this conference? Like every speaker has an opinion on something. On every topic, we have like 17 different opinions, and we just cannot agree on things. Just imagine if we could agree on a couple of things. We don't have to agree on everything. Let's use one browser, let's use one this, let's use one bundler, and then we move forward to the final goal, which is making the user happy. But no, we cannot agree on anything. We cannot agree on styling, okay? I'm going to tell you the 2 ways that we're using for styling. I'm not going to use any names, but you tell me at the end which one makes more sense, the first one or the second one. So this is number 1, styling. You have an element. You have a bunch of rules for that element. The rules are spread out throughout 90 files. Those files are filled with other rules that are not even used, they're not relevant, they're not used anywhere. The rules can override each other based on some random spec from 1985. You cannot have dynamic values in the, yeah, we have variables, we have them now, but we didn't have them like a year ago. You must combine a bunch of class names in your JavaScript. It works as expected in like 50% of the time, and you might not get the styles that you want in the end. You cry in a corner while watching SAS and BEM tutorials. This is number 1. It doesn't have a name. I'm just describing how the thing works, right? And we're arguing between this one and this one. You have an element. You describe the styles and all the versions of those styles, how the element can look. The element is styled exactly as you want it to be in 100% of the cases, but you're writing these rules in JavaScript. No, I don't like this. It's the language I already know, it's the language I already use, but I don't like this. I don't like writing styles in this language. So we have this slide, and we have the previous slide, and we cannot even agree between these 2. Like, it should be a simple decision. This makes sense, but no. We're going to argue until the end of time, should we use this or should we use that? Then we have number 2. We cannot agree on versioning things. Have you seen Angular? They went from 1 to 2 to just Angular to 7. Now it's maybe 8 or 9. And if you're laughing because, oh, we're using React, we went from 0.15 to 16.1. Like, that's not how numbers work, but we're like, yay, Angular sucks, right? We're the best. So we cannot agree, is it semver, is it not semver, is it something random? We're just random, we cannot agree on things. And the last one, we cannot agree on routing. It should be something simple, right? In the URL, there's a slash something. Based on that, render this. Like, it sounds really simple, but we're just arguing over this over and over again. Let's see an example. These two guys, they love routing. They made Ember router back in the day. They made every version of every router you ever used. Like, if we cannot agree on if they cannot agree on routing, what's left to us? Like, they're passionate about a router and they cannot agree on it, right? They separated. It was more heartbreaking than any like celebrity separation. They decided to go their own ways. I don't know what happened there, okay? One guy, Ryan, decided, I'm going to work on accessibility. I care about these other people. Michael maybe said, no, I don't care about these other people. We don't need access. I don't know what happened. I don't know the story. They just took their own paths. Now we have Reach Router and we have React Router, okay? We cannot agree. And I know, now they're back. They're back in the team. They're going to work again. They're going to merge them. They change their minds. But isn't it a bit tiring, like, to be involved in this mess and drama all that? It's a router. How complicated can it be? So what we're going to do today, we're going to make our own router, okay? Today's talk is about, because we cannot agree on things, let's make another router. Why not? So today we're going to talk about the new React, and we're going to make this our own router using the new React. And what do we mean by the new React? We have hooks. Like, that's the hot topic. But I was, in my workshop yesterday or 2 days ago, I asked who has used hooks, and like, no one raised their hand. Probably that's why they came to the workshop. But I want to ask you here, who have used hooks already? All right, that's good, that's good, that's good, cool. And then we have lazy, React.lazy. It's not that we're lazy, it's just React is lazy now. And we have suspense. So we're going to talk about these three things. But first, before we go into the live demo, I have to get the, why did I put the transition there? I don't know. We have to get out the puns about hook, okay? Because you're going to make them, you're going to tweet them, so let's just get it out of the system now. You're going to get hooked. You can groan after each one, okay? Hooks are not going to leave you hanging. I hate classes, so thanks for hooking me up. The jokes in this talk are off the hook. And I'm sorry, okay? So let's start. We're going to start with making our own router. I have my little list here. It's spoilers. It's like season 2. Don't read this, okay? So let's see. I need to zoom this, I guess. Let's go in the console. Here's we're going to see the errors. So this is what some people call a startup. They're going to make a hello world, and they're like, oh, it's my new startup. So welcome to my new startup. We're going to start adding some state. So what we have is just an index.js, nothing fancy here, just an index.js, and we have a root file, which is somewhere in root.js, and that's it. We have this couple of divs, we have some styling, using normal CSS. I didn't use CSS in JS, you don't have to panic. And now we're going to add some state. So the first question is, how do we add state to a functional component, right? Until now, what we learned is, we cannot add state to functional components. They're pure, they're dumb. They output whatever you put in the props. They just output something out of the props, and that's it. But now that is not true. Functional components can re-render based on their props, based on the state we put inside of them, and based on some context. So if they're reading from some context value, they're going to re-render because of that context. So let's start with making our router. We need some kind of a state variable. So how do we add that? We're going to say use state, and I'm going to say that my initial value for my state is going to be home. So here, as a value, you can actually use whatever you want. It can be a string, it can be an array, it can be an object. Whatever you could put in a class component, you could also put it here. Can you see in the back? Is it okay? Yeah, cool. Okay. So we can use any value that we want here as the initial value of the state. And then here, what we're going to get an array. We can destructure it. The first member is the value of that, and the second is the setter for that state. So this one is going to be page, and this one is going to be set page. You can name this whatever you want. You can name this Ellen page or whatever. It's just React is giving you the freedom to destructure this array and just name this whatever you want. So let's just, okay, adding page state. I have to check this, so remind me. Render page somewhere, so let's do that. So I'm going to put the page here. I'm going to put a div. Page, I'm going to go back here, and we see home as the value. So now we've added some state to our component. This shouldn't confuse you. A lot of people in my workshops, when they see the hooks for the first time, they think this is some global state. This is just like state in a class component, and it's just tied to this root component. It's not going anywhere in a global state on the window object. It's just for this component. So we showed the variable there. What are we going to do now is we're going to add 3 buttons. Okay, so one button is going to be go home, go ohme, go home, go to gallery, go to about. So we're going to add 3 buttons, and on click, I'm going to say set the page to home. I'm going to copy this on click, gallery, and about. That's it, we have our router, perfect. Go home, go to gallery, go to about. Thanks for listening to my talk, and I'm No, it's still, the router is not done, but it's like starting to get there, right? When I click these buttons, which are pretty fancy, material design, let me just improve design a little bit, just a little bit. Okay, perfect. Now we're talking. No, one more, wait for it. No, this demo is gonna be off the hook. All right, so now I can click to on these buttons. We're calling the setPage function, it's changing the page variable, and the component is re-rendering again. Pretty advanced stuff. So if you're concerned about these inline styles, someone, I don't know who was it, made a Medium article with benchmarks, even with classes, that if you put if you create this kind of functions in the render method, no matter how complex is your app, you're not going to have a problem with performance, okay? So unless you see a problem with performance, don't try to optimize this. But if you're still concerned, if it's your first time that you're seeing functions defined this way, you can still pull it out. Like you can say this is go home, and this is go to gallery, and galler, okay? Go to about. And now if you want to optimize this so it's not created every time, you can import another hook called use callback, and you can just wrap this with use callback, okay? So here, I'm going to put an empty array. I'm going to explain what does this mean later. But basically, it means that this is only going to be created once, and whatever we put in this array changes. If I put something in this array, if I say whenever the page changes, recreate this function, it's going to be dependent on the page. If you put an empty array, it means never create this function again, only create it once per instance. So that is use callback. We're not going to use it here. We don't care for performance. We care about our users for now. So concerned about that, show use callback. All right. So we need some pages JSON, like I need to define an object, call it pages here, and define some pages. So this one is going to be home, it's going to have ID of home, it's going to have a path of home. This one is going to be about, it's too cold here, about and path is about. And one more is going to be gallery, the ID is going to be gallery, and the path is going to be gallery. Perfect, so we added that. We're not going to use the page here anymore to show anything. And what are we going to do? Change to object in, yeah. So now I cannot, instead of using a string here for my initial state, I'm just going to put this entire object as my initial state. So our current page is just going to be an object of ID and path. So I'm going to change this to pages.home. That's it. And based on this, we're going to render something here. So I'm going to say if page.id equals pages.home.id, welcome home. We're going to change this to go home. Drunk. And gallery page, and it's so hard to code at this angle. I should try something else. Okay, pages, gallery, and about. So let's see if this works. If I screwed up already. Yep, yes I did. Page.id equals pages.home.id, and pages. Yeah, probably I used. Yeah, thank you. That's my next. That's why I should see the checklist. I just don't see the checklist. So here it should be pages.home and pages.gallery and pages.about. So we're gonna change this, go back. This doesn't work, I'm quitting the demo. We're gonna talk about Redux. Okay, it works. Good news, good news. So this still works, but we're not doing anything in the URL. The point of our router is just, this is tabs for now. It doesn't have anything to do with the URL. So what are we gonna do is we're gonna pull another hook called useEffect. So this one is basically a replacement for all of your lifecycle methods. So what is new in React is whenever you learn about hooks, your immediate question is, but how do I do all the lifecycle methods with hooks? You don't. You have to completely shift your way of thinking in effects. An effect is a side effect that happens after React renders your component, and then you decide when does that effect get triggered. So there's no more when it mounted or when it unmounted or when component will receive props and when state changes and so on. You just think of an effect, something like I want to fetch some data based on this prop, or I want to change the document title based on this state, or I want to do something, trigger some side effect based on something. So this is the new way of thinking. So I'm going to import useEffect, and we're going to say something here. useEffect, and we're going to say triggered effect, ... And basically, if I just leave it like this, if I click around here, we're going to see that the effect is getting triggered. But we want to make the effect dependent on something. Because right now, if you leave the effects this way, basically it's going to happen all the time. You cannot optimize it. After every render, the effect is going to be triggered. So we want to trigger an effect in we want to modify the history object. We want to push something in the history every time the page is changed. That's our effect. So how do we do that? In the second argument here, you have an array. So the second argument of use callback and use effect is an array. In the second argument, you're specifying things that should be monitored. Every time one of those things change, the effect is going to get triggered. If we leave it like this, just an empty array, this is basically your replacement for component did mount. Okay? If you want to do something only on mount, it's going to be if you put an empty array in there. So if I save and if I go back and I start clicking around, you will see this console log doesn't get printed again because it gets printed only once when the component mounts. So what if we want to trigger it when the component mounts and something changes? We put something in the array. So I'm going to put the page. Every time the page is changed, trigger this effect. So I'm going back, I'm clicking around, go to about, and we can see that we are triggering this effect right here. So what do we need to do here to have a functional router? We're going to do, let me see if I'm cleaning this up, did mount, page argument, cleanup effect. Yeah, if you want to have something similar to component will unmount, which is basically going to clean up after your effect, so it's going to clean up on unmount, but also after each argument change. So whenever this changes from A to B, the cleanup function is going to get called. Whenever the component is unmounted, the cleanup function is going to get called. So basically, this is the equivalent of component will unmount. So whatever you put inside of this function in the return function, it's going to happen on unmount, and every time this page changes, this is going to try to clean up the previous thing. Why did I make it this way? Just imagine you have some data fetching based on a user ID or something, and if you're in the middle of request and you're triggering another effect, you want to cancel the previous network request in the cleanup function and then trigger the new effect. So we're not going to use a cleanup function. We don't need it here. What we're going to do is we're going to say whenever the page changes, we're going to do window.history.pushState, and this is going to be null, and this is going to be null, and here we're going to have page.path. And I think that's it. We have the router. Yeah, but the home path shouldn't be home, you idiot. It should be just a slash, who says /home, and that's it. If you look at the URL, you see we have a functional router. Thank you very much for listening, and no, we have a few more things. So this works, right? We can trigger the URL, but what happens if I stay on gallery and I just refresh the page? It says welcome home. If I go to about, refresh the page, it just says welcome home. And the effect gets triggered, and we're basically replacing the location again. So what do we want to do is here, instead of just using pages home in the beginning, we want to find the initial page. And how do we do that? We're going to say initial page equals object.values from pages, and we're going to find the page that has path equals window.location.pathname, I guess, and here we're going to put the initial page. So let's see if this works. Go to gallery, refresh. Now when I refresh, we're just getting the gallery page. And that's the basics of a router. So you may think that I'm making jokes with the talk and that this couldn't be a functional router, but I made something similar with MobX. So I called it MobX router. It's from a few years ago, but basically it works in a really, really similar way. Now we're using React State, but I was using MobX State, and I'm actually using this one, and a couple of, I don't know, 300 people are using it, I guess. But it's like state decoupled from the UI, and it works really well in combination with MobX. So this could be used, and it is used in a bunch of production apps. It's just way simpler routing than React router, Rich router, and so on. What we're missing right here is URL params, parsing some regex expressions and so on, but I'm not going to do that live. I'm too scared. So our router works for now. That's cool. Let's see what else do we have. Find initial page. If we don't find the initial page, we're going to say or pages.home. So how do we don't want to bloat our root component with this kind of logic. We want to move this somewhere. So how do we move hooks? Unlike higher components, which were a major pain in the ass to extract into something else, if you want to extract some logic and side effects, you have to create a higher component, which was a function that returns a function, that returns a function, that returns a function, that returns a function, and it returns a component. So that wasn't really intuitive. How do you remove hooks out of a component into a custom hook? You just select the thing, like literally select from here to here, and you move it to something. So I'm going to move it to use router, which is going to be a function here. I'm just going to paste it, and I'm going to say use router, like this. But now something is going to complain here. It's going to say set page is not defined and page is not defined. So can we return something from a custom hook? Yes, we can. We can return an object, we can return one thing, we can return an array, whatever we want. In this case, I'm going to return an object, so I'm going to say page and set page. I need them here. This is going to stay the same. This is going to be a little router, and from here, I'm going to get set page and page, and we made our use router. So let's see if this works. Still works. All right. Let's take our router, which is 20 lines. Just move it into a file, use router.js. Okay, export it, and we need the pages. It would be cool if you also take the pages and just not put them in the root component, because we're going to need them in the other parts of our app. So I'm going to do pages.js here. Just export these pages like this, export router, go into use router from use router, all right? It's like this. And here I'm going to import the pages from pages. See if everything works. Pages is not defined. Let's just be lazy. Copy this here. Clean up these two things. And we have our first custom hook, which is use router. Now you can publish this on NPM, and other people can use it, and so on. Let's move on here. Extract to use router pages.js. Okay. Now what happens if I want to use this state from the router somewhere in my nested components? Let's say I have a deeply nested component called header or something, and I want to read which is the current route. I want to set the page, maybe. I want to have a button that's going to go to the login page or whatever. So let's do that. In my components, I'm going to create a header.js, and I'm going to call it header. And in here, I want to say something like, let's just put the class name so it looks startup 1.0. Okay. Now I have to use it in order to show up. So header is here. Okay, startup 1.0, we have our header. So now on the right side, only on the home page, I want to show a login button, not on the other pages. So how do we do that? Like, this header doesn't have access to the page and set page. We have to use context. We can use props. So I can go in my root.js and just pass page and set page as props. But if this component is deeply nested, we have to drill down, we have to use prop drilling in order to pass it through context. So I'm not going to pass it as a prop, but I'm going to wrap all of my children here of the root component with a context provider. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here, and we're going to create router context.js, and here I'm going to import React from React. I'm going to export const router context equals react.create context. It's just going to be an empty object for now. And now this gives me two components. If you haven't used it, it's really simple. You just import the context value from here. And now it gives you a component called router context.provider, or whatever you name this. You're free to name this context whatever you want. And now I'm wrapping all of the children of this component here, which means no matter how deeply a component is nested inside of this provider, it can always request the value from this provider. So here, if I'm providing set page and page, now in my header component, I can easily read set page and page. So I need only page, and I'm going to say use context, which is coming from React. It's another hook. It's an easier way of using context than render props, and I'm going to say router context, like this. And now I can say, this is my title here. I'm going to put a button, call it login, and I want to show this button only if this page.id equals pages.home.id. Show this button. That's the logic. Go back, pages is not defined, import pages, okay. Okay, so now if I'm home, I'm going to see this. If I'm on the other pages, I'm not going to see it. So use context, the hook for use context, makes like every component pattern in React so much simpler. Like compound components, controlled components, whatever component pattern that you come up with, it's way easier when you're using use context. So let's see, provide page, set page, we did that. Here as a value, I just want to mention that we can pass whatever we want. So let's move on. How much time do I have left? 2:29, 15 minutes. Okay, we're going to make it. Let's add component to our pages. So instead of just doing this logic here, like page.id, blah, 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 I'm just going to remove this and just add components in line, like this. So this is a component, is going to be welcome home, and this is a component, it's going to be about, ... and this is a component, it's going to be gallery, ... and in my root file, I'm just going to create a routes, and this routes is going to be a component that's going to take care of rendering our routes, okay? So in routes.js, I'm just going to, routes. And here I'm going to pull from the router again, okay? So I'm going to take page, and I'm going to use the context, router, context, we can easily read it, and I'm going to say render just page.component. I think this should work if I didn't screw up something. Routes is not defined. Let's just import it here. Routes, clean it up a bit. Components like this. Oh, blah, blah, React. Why do we have to import it? It's not even there. React from React. Okay, so now we have our routes. We don't have to repeat for every route that we add. Route.js, let's add protected. So the good thing about doing routing this way is you can put all of your configuration into this pages file, right? So I can say that the about page is protected, true, and the gallery page is protected, true. I'm just putting whatever I want. These are just objects. So now in my routes, I'm going to say if page protected, just return div nothing to see here, dot, dot, dot. So now if I go back to my app, when I click to these pages, we're going to see nothing to see here. We can only see the home page. So let's do one more thing. Hopefully we're going to make it on time. I want to show you a couple of cool things. If we do a login page, and if I go to my pages, just be lazy, copy paste this. It's not protected. It's the login page. Login, login. And here I'm just going to do login page like this. I need to import it. Doesn't exist yet. Login page. We're going to create a login form, which is a pain in the ass usually in React, but we're going to do it. So we have type text, and the placeholder is going to be username, and type password, and this is going to be password. And I'm going to have a button, which is going to be log in. And if I didn't screw up something, I did probably. Okay, now in my header, I want to reroute when I click this to set page pages.login. Okay, I need to pull set page from the router. And when I click login, I'm going to go to the login page. Okay, we have our login thingy, and now we need to add some state to it. So login page, inputs button, valid info. Okay, we're not going to implement an actual login. I'm just going to fake it here. So let's say username is Mark, password. You can guess it. It's an easy one. Zuck. And we need to add some state, right? If I want to type into these fields and submit them later, I need to add state. So let's add some state. Username, and set username equals use state. It's going to be an empty string. Just paste this, and password, and set password. Set password. It's going to be state. I need to import it from here. And I need to say that the value for this one is username, and the onChange equals e.set username, e.target.value. I'm just going to be lazy again and set password here, and the value is going to be password. All right, I already don't like it. You'll see why. Okay, I don't know if this works. On click, I need login. I'm going to create a login function. You can wrap it with use callback if you want. You don't have to. And I'm going to say if username equals valid info.username and password equals .valid info.password. Pretty advanced security here. Otherwise, show a helpful error message. Wrong. Otherwise, it's okay. Username and password. Let's see. This is how we can add two state variables at once. So let's see. Wrong, Mark, Zuck. It works in the console. Okay, moving forward. On click, check if valid is form valid. How do I check if this form is valid? I'm going to say is valid is form valid equals if username and username.trim, we don't want someone writing an empty string, and password.trim doesn't equal empty, right? And here I want to disable this button if the form disabled is not valid. But as you can see, like this is, it's really easier to do forms with the new React, but it could be like even easier if we do something else. Like I'm going to move all of our logic for inputs in a custom hook called useInput, which is going to make our life simpler. So what would it do? So I'm going to call it const useInput. Just check the time, 10 minutes, okay. UseInput, and instead of doing username and set username, I'm just going to copy this, move it here. I'm going to make it something more generic, like value and set value. And what do I need here? I need an onChange, and I need this as a value. So I'm going to copy this and just return an object from this hook, like this. OnChange equals this, value equals value. This is set value. And now I made this a little bit more reusable. So I can say const username equals useInput. And here I'm going to put an empty string, which means this is my initial value. I have to accept it here, initial value, and just put it instead of the empty string here. So now we made a reusable hook called useInput, and I can copy it and just use it for password, useInput. We can remove all of this. Here we're going to say username.value and password.value. We're going to compare it, username.value, password.value. All right, and this is becoming a pain in the ass. I don't want to do this. I can just compute it right here in my hook. So I'm going to say isValid equals if we have a value and value.trim doesn't equal an empty string. So now, instead of checking this, I can even move all of my fields in a fields array, username and password like this, and I can say isForm valid only if every field is valid. So what I like with the new React, easy there, field. What I like is before, in order to do this, what we did now, you would pull in Redux Saga, you would pull in observables, RxJS, you would call 3 friends. Now you can just do it with a state and context and everything else, and you can just roll your own things, if, of course, if you're using something simple. If I would like to redo a form library, I better use Formic or something else. But for most forms, our hook is going to be enough. But we're not finished. What we need to do here is, instead of repeating this, I can just say ... username here. And I don't need value and onChange anymore. And I can remove it also for password, ... password here. Now React is going to complain. It's going to say it doesn't recognize isValid because we're spreading over the entire element. So I need to group them into bind. We're going to put onChange there. Let's take onChange and value. So these are the only 2 props that we want to spread over. And here I'm going to spread bind and here bind. No more errors. And we made our little form thingy. Let's see, Mark, Zuck, login. It's OK. All right, use input fields, replace value, ... error, bind. What is this? Error bind. OK. Don't put type and placeholder. When you're going to start abstracting things into hook, your developer brain is like, everything is an abstraction. I need to take this type and placeholder and just define them here in my hook. No. Our custom hook only takes care about the state and functions related to that state variable. Type and placeholder have nothing to do with the state, so they are going to remain props. Don't make your own form library, that's my point there, I guess. If you start getting into something more complex, you might want to take this, which is possible. You might want to take all of this, like this, and just call your own login form or something. Or you might want to make it a bit abstracted and call it use form, and then you add validations, and you're going to end up with Formic. Do yourself the favor and just install a library. And you might be wondering about this next point, right? You're like, I'm curious to see what is he going to do there. So when I started doing this with hooks, you're really, really tempted to basically take all of your logic right here and just call this like use scope or use controller. Let's call it use controller. And here I'm going to do like scope equals use controller. And now I can return everything on the scope here, like username, password, and whatever I have. And now I can just access them. You hate me, right? And so on. But although you think, oh, this might work, we can separate the controlling logic from the component and the view, when you try it, after like a couple of minutes, you're like, this doesn't make any sense, I have to revert back, and I have to split it into more components. So whenever you want to extract the logic, if it gets like really, really big, just extract it into more components and don't try to make a big, giant custom hook for your one component. So reverting this, because I'm getting like, ugh, bad memories. And we're going to put the login form back. Let's see what else we have here. 5 minutes, 6 minutes left. Use scope. Persist effect. OK, this is a really cool one. What if we want to, whenever we're typing in this input, what if I want to persist it into local storage? You cannot do it in render. You might be tempted, if you're just starting with hooks, you might be tempted to do things here, like window.localstorage.setItem. But that's a side effect. It should happen only after the render. So what you want to do is do something like use effect. And we're going to call an effect only when the username or the password changes. So we're going to do window.localstorage.setItem. Password is going to be password.value, and username is going to be username.value. So anytime one of these changes, we're just going to persist them in local storage. When I do that and I start typing Mark, Zuck, and window.localstorage, we're going to get them here. But if I refresh the page, I'm not going to get them here. Why is that? Because all the time I'm initializing this with an empty string. So if you want to read from local storage, you're going to do something like window.localstorage.getItem username, and copy this, and here get item password. Like this. We're going back, Everything is going to work, hopefully. I refresh, everything is going to be here now. But what we want to do is we want to extract this into a custom hook. Now it's doing two things at once. It doesn't make much sense. So what I want to do is just call a hook called use persist equals something like this. It's going to take a key and a value, and it's going to call an effect. So every time this value changes, we're going to say window, easy, window.local storage.set item key value, like this. So we made a reusable hook for persisting things into local storage. This value can be a string, an object, whatever you want. So now here, I'm just going to call use persist password and password.value and username and username.value. So I can remove this. Let's see if everything works. If it doesn't, we're done with the demo. Refresh. OK. Another hook. Get from local storage, get only once. If you have a complex computation here for this initial value, you might want to do it only once. How you do that? You do it with a callback function. So this means read it from local storage only once, and then just care for the local state instead of reading from the local storage all the time. So whenever you have like a complex computation here, make sure that you put it in a callback function. Move to use persist, authentication context. I don't think we have enough time for this. We have 4 minutes left, but we actually started 5 minutes later. So can I use the time to finish? Yeah? All right, we're going to take 10 more minutes. What if we want to... Well, we started late, so it's only fair. What if I want to put another context thing here? So let's say that I care about my user, want to store the value of my user, and I want everyone in the bit, every component to have access to the user. I'm going to create one more context. I'm going to be lazy, copy the router context. Already exists, the context. I'm going to call it authentication context here, but it's basically the same thing. And in my root component, I'm just going to wrap everything auth context with a provider. A lot of providers here. And we're going to put some value. So where are we going to store this value? Let's store it here from now, user, and set user. It's going to be use state. We're going to start with an empty user. Let's just import this. And I'm going to pass user and set user to every component that needs it. I'm going to paste this, authentication context. OK, we are done. Use state user in root. Got it. Add logout functions. So yeah, we need to create our logout function, which is really simple. We're just setting the user to null. And I'm going to pass it here, logout. So now every component in my tree that needs the user, setting the user, or the logout function can just easily access them. So add logout function, provide user, blah, blah, blah. Set user, set page in the login function. OK, so now in our login page, we're actually going to make it usable. In my login, if everything is OK here, I'm going to say set the page to pages.home and set the user to name, Mark, surname, Zuck, something like this. So here, I don't have access to set page and set user. They're coming from two different contexts. I'm going to do that. Set page equals use context, router context. And the same thing for the set user. It's coming from authentication context. So we're reading from two different stores. If you're wondering, why are we not putting the authentication, the user, the theme, the router, everything in one store, React is not going to be performant enough. And even if you need only the routing logic, whenever the user changes, this component is going to change again. And it doesn't make sense. So when we're separating things in this way, if I need the router logic, I'm just going to read it like this. If I need both of them, I'm going to read them like this. So let's see if this is going to work. Mark, Zuck, login. OK, welcome home. We see the login button here, which shouldn't happen. Now let's go in our header. We're going to extract this logic to show login. And we're going to only show it if we don't have a user. Where is the user coming from? It's coming from use context, user authentication context, like this. And only in that case, we're going to show the user. I'm going to show one more button if we have a user. Easy there. We're going to show one more button, call it log out. And on click, we're just going to do log out. Log out, like this. OK, go home, you're drunk, log out. Log in, Mark, Zuck, log in. Go to gallery, nothing to see here, log out. OK, our logic works. We need one more thing. We have this. We have change show login, add logout, change routes.js. Ah, yeah. So we want to access these protected routes if we have a user, right? So if we don't have a user, only then show nothing to see here. So I'm going to copy this, grab the user from authentication context. And now, if I'm, let's see, if I'm logged out and I go here, wait, what? Did I invert the logic? If the page is protected and there's no user, Nothing to see here. The what? I just hear log out, log in, log in, log out. Wait, I don't want to get stuck here. Show login. If there's a user, log out. Can one person say? The user from local storage? I couldn't even do this if I wanted to, but I made it somehow. It's reading from local storage. It's keeping the user happy. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, go to gallery, go to about, go home. When I log out, we get, okay, I get it. So when you go to gallery and about, you're not logged in. Now you have the access to that. When we log in, we're going to see gallery and about. So do we have one more thing? Yeah, we have three more things. We're not going to use this one. We're not going to use this one. Just authentication manager. Whenever your logic starts to bloat a component, like here, we have a user and a logout and so on, it would be smart if we just create a component, call it authentication manager.js, and our SC manager, like this. And in this one, what I want to do is just take the children. This sounds so terrible. We're taking the children. And I want to copy all the logic regarding the user in this authentication manager. So I'm going to put it here, the state, the logout function. I'm going to take this and just replace it with authentication manager like this. This is going to be authentication manager like this. And inside of here, we're just going to wrap the children prop with this context. So this component doesn't do anything special. It just acts as a store. So it wraps the children prop with all the functions and the state that it needs. So when I go back, everything works the same. It's just that our logic is a little cleaner. Okay, last thing that I want to show you is React.lazy. And to be honest, I never did code splitting before this, because now it's like you don't have any excuse not to do code splitting. Let's say our header component is like really bloated. It has Lodash, moment.js, date functions, everything, styles inside, and we want to split that entire chunk. How do you do it? Is you just replace this with header equals react.lazy, and you just say import components.header, like this. And now it's lazy loaded. If you try to render it like this, React is going to complain, so you must wrap it in suspense, just so you don't keep it in suspense. You have to import it here and say fallback. If you don't provide fallback, it's not going to work, so I'm going to say the fallback is loading, ... And now if I go to my network and we inspect what's going on, we're going to see that our header was separated from our chunk, and it's now loaded based on the fact if it's rendered in React or if it's not. So if we have some logic around the header, like if I say that I don't want to load this header at all, so if we do this, false, and we're not going to see the chunk loaded here at all. So surprisingly, that demo went well. I just prepared it this morning. So let's see, final slides. I have 5 more minutes, right? You're burning with questions. Does this replace Redux? Number 1. Number 2, is Redux dead now? Number 3, should I write a Medium article about how hooks killed Redux? No to all 3 of them. Like every time there's a change in React, people are asking, is Redux finally dead? It's like some people are waiting. Did it die? I'm waiting for it. So Redux under the hood is using hooks, is using context, is using all of these things, but it's still going to be more performant. So you cannot replace Redux, MobX, global state management stores with your own silly store like we did right now. But what you could do is you can push your app as far as possible using only hooks and context. So I've never been able to do that before without pulling MobX or MobX state tree because I'm using that. But now you could really write an app using, like I showed, some authentication context, routing context, and so on, and a bunch of use states that could cover even a bigger app. But it doesn't kill Redux. Can I create one global store and use one context object? No, you can, but it's not going to be performant. If you store everything in a tree, when you're using the context to read that object, no matter what changes in the object, every component is going to re-render. In Redux, you have connect, so you're reading from connect, you're saying, I want the component to re-render based on these props from the store. If you put one giant object and context and provide it with context, it's not going to be that performant. Class is dead. I hope so, but they're not. So the React team is going to keep the classes until some major version, but the general advice that they're giving is, let me show this slide. Facebook is still using mixins. So in their code base, they have mixins, they have classes, and now they have hooks. So they don't have the time. If they don't have the time and engineers to sit down and refactor everything, neither should you, okay? So your class components should remain class components, they're gonna work, but the new components that you're writing, make sure that you start writing them with hooks because they're gonna be the future of state management and everything else in React. Not everything is a hook, so don't get too excited about them and don't, like when I started using them, everything was a hook for me. Use copy to clipboard, use this, use that. So you will be tempted, but make sure that you prefix your hook functions with use, just so it's clearer to you whether it is a hook or it's just a plain JavaScript function. Don't try to replicate the old lifecycle methods. This is one of the mistakes I made. I was like, but how do I did component will unmount? You have to just forget about that way of thinking and just think in the new way, which is you have side effects, and each side effect is only doing one thing. Fetching from the network, writing to local storage, writing to the document title, those are all separate effects. You don't use one use effect for your entire component. So you have to forget. In my workshops, I see a pattern where people who are beginners, they haven't seen React, they have an easier time with hooks. When you introduce React like this, they're like, okay, this makes sense. But for us who have used React before, it's like, I'm gonna try to get all of the lifecycle methods and replace them with use effect. So you have to shift the way of thinking. Write your own hooks before using random hooks from NPM. So there are huge collections. I have some links here with hooks, and you might be tempted to just pull hooks and not write your own. But if you're just starting, please, for the last couple of weeks, just write everything from scratch. Window resizing, local storage, just make sure that you understand how they work before you pull from NPM. Bonus TypeScript. This is not about React, but React scripts is finally supporting TypeScript, and it's as easy as just changing one file from JS to TS. And for me, it's a huge benefit. You might try it. It's not part of the React API, but it's part of Create React App. So if you're asking where can I find this, like lists of hooks and so on, I thought you would never ask. So I made a little library with some simple hooks. It's called React Hanger because you're hanging. Oh, okay. And Nick has a collection called React Hooks, which is huge. I think it has like 3,000 hooks in here. You're gonna find a hook for everything. And I made a little example. I open sourced one of my landing pages that's using a bunch of hooks. And in the README, I wrote like how does every hook work. It has hooks about Google Analytics, animations, poses, composing poses, and so on. So is this the last slide? I think it's the last slide. I want to thank you very much for listening. I'm going to put this in my vlog if you don't mind. And my camera is dead probably. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be around. You can find me here. I'm Kitze everywhere. And thank you for listening. That's it.
This conference has been gradually getting better for me. The quality of the lineup is usually really good, and this is something I'm really saying thumbs up.
They're really trying to get speakers here that are pushing to the future of web technologies.
I just feel like it's a very community-driven conference. It also has a lot of quality, and people are just nice. Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is AgentConf in Dornbirn.
Amazing venue. Austria is beautiful. Meeting all of the people in the community and getting to go and hang out and ski.